I was parked in the lot outside my office, the hum of traffic blending into the static of a long day, when my phone buzzed with Grandma's name. I smiled. At first her calls were rare, but always warm. I answered quickly, expecting a chat about the garden or her book club. "Celine, honey," her voice came through, soft but troubled. "How are you feeling? Are you any better?" My brow furrowed. "Better, Grandma. I'm fine." "Why, what's wrong?" There was a pause. One of those heavy silences where you know the next words will change something forever. "Your parents told me you've been very ill. That's why you couldn't make it to Damien's wedding." The words hit like a punch. My stomach twisted, hands tightening on the steering wheel though I wasn't driving anywhere. What wedding? Her breathing filled the space between us. "Your brother's wedding, sweetheart. Last weekend." I stared through the windshield, my reflection in the glass a stranger's. My brother was married. The family had gathered, celebrated, taken pictures while I sat in this same car. Oblivious. They had told everyone I was too sick to attend. They hadn't even told me there was something to attend. Grandma's voice trembled. "Oh, Celine." You truly didn't know. I forced myself to answer, though my throat felt tight. "No, I didn't know anything." For a moment. Neither of us spoke. My heart pounded so loud it seemed to echo in the silence. Then Grandma sighed, grief heavy in her tone. "I don't understand why they would, but I thought you should know." We said our goodbyes, her voice full of worry I couldn't soothe, and the call ended. I sat there, phone limp in my hand, the world around me unchanged while mine cracked wide open. It wasn't only the wedding, it was the confirmation of something I had tried to ignore my whole life, that, to my family, I was expendable. Invisible. The steering wheel felt cold beneath my palms as I finally started the engine. My parents hadn't just left me out, they had lied, erased me, and carried on as if I didn't exist. I drove home in a haze, the question already burning in my mind, demanding an answer as I reached for the door to my empty apartment. I dropped my bag on the couch and sat in the silence of my apartment, the phone call replaying again and again. My brother had married, and I hadn't even been told. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, one that had been repeating itself for years. Damien had always been the center of gravity in our family. When we were kids, he played baseball, and every Saturday was spent at his games. Dad, Richard, shouted from the sidelines like the world depended on each pitch, while Mom, Evelyn, clapped as if every run was a miracle. My piano recitals or debate competitions earned polite nods at best. That same imbalance followed us into adulthood. Damien chose law school, and suddenly he was the shining hope of the Calloway name. Dad boasted to anyone who'd listen about his son arguing cases before professors who'd once trained federal judges. When I was promoted to project director at my firm, a position I'd fought years to earn, Dad barely looked up from the sports section. Even the condo I bought last year, my first real home, was dismissed as a starter place. Mom toured it once, smiling politely while pointing out that Damien and his fiancée were considering a much larger townhouse near the river. Her warmth was reserved for moments when an audience was present, at church or community events. She introduced me with cheerful pride. But back home, she rarely asked about my life beyond whether I had finally found someone. Damien thrived on it. He'd smirk across the dinner table whenever Dad compared his wins to my supposed lack of progress. Every conversation seemed to orbit around him, his cases, his vacations, his plans. I had learned to shrink myself, to play the role of the reliable but forgettable daughter. But sitting alone in my apartment that night, I knew something inside me had finally snapped. Their silence around Damien's wedding wasn't just another slight. It was proof that, to them, I wasn't even part of the picture, and I wasn't sure I could keep pretending anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed, still shaken from Grandma's call. When I unlocked my phone and opened Instagram, I rarely used it, but something in me needed proof. Maybe Grandma had been mistaken. Maybe there had been a small ceremony I truly wasn't meant to attend. The first image I saw crushed that hope. Damien stood under an elaborate arch of white roses, a tailored suit hugging his broad shoulders. Beside him, his bride glowed in lace, her veil catching the sunlight like spun glass. My father, Richard, walked Damien proudly down the aisle as though it were his own triumph. I scrolled, my throat tightening. There was Evelyn, tears streaming down her cheeks during the vows. Photos of the reception showed crystal chandeliers, a ballroom filled with round tables draped in silk, and a towering cake that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. I recognized faces from every corner of my life, childhood neighbors, distant cousins from 3 states away, Dad's golf buddies, Mom's book club friends. People I hadn't seen in years were there, raising glasses and smiling, and me, I was nowhere. This wasn't an intimate ceremony with limited space. It was a spectacle, 100 guests at least, maybe more. They had gone out of their way to invite almost everyone they'd ever known, everyone except me. My stomach churned as I kept scrolling, each swipe another twist of the knife. I saw Damien on the dance floor, Evelyn laughing beside him, Richard giving a speech with a glass of champagne in his hand. Their faces were lit with joy, untouched by guilt, as if I had never been meant to stand among them. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. I put the phone down and stared into the darkened room, a truth pressing down on me heavier than anything I'd carried before. I hadn't been overlooked. I had been erased, and I needed to know why. The drive to my parents' house blurred into flashes of streetlights and fury. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight my fingers ached, but I didn't ease up. By the time I pulled into their driveway, I was running on pure adrenaline. I didn't even knock. I pushed the front door open like I always had, my chest burning with anger. Celine! My mother's voice floated from the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "It's not Sunday. What's wrong?" "You know exactly what's wrong," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Why wasn't I invited to Damien's wedding? Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, like she was searching for an excuse. "Finally," she murmured. "We just thought you wouldn't want a big crowd. You've never liked those kinds of events." My laugh was bitter. "You decided for me. You cut me out of my own brother's wedding because you assumed I wouldn't enjoy it." Dad's footsteps sounded behind me. Richard emerged from the living room, his expression annoyed. "What's with all the yelling?" I turned to him. "Tell me why I wasn't invited." He glanced at Mom, then back at me, jaw tight. "You really want the truth?" "Yes," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "Damien has his life together," he said flatly. "He's a lawyer. He's successful. He's marrying someone who matches him. If you'd been there, what would you have had to say? You'd have looked pathetic." The words sliced through me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Damien's voice came from the top of the stairs. He strolled down casually, adjusting his cufflinks. "Honestly, Celine, it would have been awkward. Everyone knows you don't fit in with that world." Something inside me snapped. "Then don't expect an invitation to mine." There was silence for a beat. Then Dad chuckled, shaking his head. "Be serious. You'll never get married." I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out the door, their laughter following me into the night as I promised myself they'd regret underestimating me. The night after the confrontation, I lay awake in my condo staring at the ceiling, their words replaying in my head. Pathetic. Awkward. Never get married. The irony was almost unbearable. They knew so little about me, yet they had judged my entire worth as though they were experts on my life. They never asked about my work, never cared enough to notice the long nights I poured into projects. When I was promoted to project director last year, I celebrated alone with a glass of wine. I had wanted to share the news, but when I mentioned it at Sunday dinner, Damien interrupted with another one of his stories, and the moment slipped away. Even when I bought this condo, my first real home, something I'd worked years to afford, my parents dismissed it as a starter place. They never came back after that first visit. Damien's townhouse was more impressive, they said, but what they truly knew nothing about was Julian. We met in college, two friends in parallel programs who kept each other sane through endless exams. Life pulled us apart for a few years, until I found him again at the company where I now work. He was already in a leadership role, polished and confident. Later, I learned why his father owned the company, a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom in the city. Julian never lorded it over me. He valued hard work, respected my independence, and loved me in a way I had never known at home. 6 months ago, he asked me to marry him. I'd worn his ring every day since, a ring my family never once noticed. We kept it quiet, respecting his family's privacy and my own need for peace. But when I told Julian about the confrontation, he held my hand firmly and said, "Then we choose who deserves to be in our lives." His words settled in me like an anchor, and for the first time, I felt steady enough to imagine a future without them. Once the decision was made, planning our wedding became a quiet joy. Julian's mother suggested an old estate in New England, a place with ivy-covered stone walls and gardens that looked as if they'd grown out of a dream. His family offered to cover the cost, insisting they wanted the day to be beautiful without burdening us. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to picture walking down an aisle where I was wanted. We kept the guest list small, just 30 names. My grandmother, who had always been a steady light, my aunt and cousins, the only relatives who had ever shown up for me without conditions, and a handful of friends who knew me not as an afterthought, but as a person worth celebrating. It wasn't about numbers. It was about belonging. Still, the question lingered like a shadow. Should I invite my parents? The thought twisted in me late at night. But then I remembered their laughter, my father's voice declaring I'd never marry, Damien's smirk as if my life would never measure up. The sting was still too sharp. I couldn't risk letting them poison the one day meant to be mine. Then came the call. Evelyn's number flashed on my screen one evening. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Celine," she said quickly, almost breathless. "Your grandmother mentioned something. Are you really getting married? Please, tell me we're invited. We're your parents. We deserve to be there." Her words might have carried weight once, but now they rang hollow. "You made it clear at Damien's wedding where I stand in this family." I told her, my tone even. "I won't open the door again just because it suits you now." There was silence on the other end, followed by a choked breath. "You'll regret this," she whispered. I ended the call. My chest tight, but my resolve unshaken. The wedding would go on without them, and maybe for the first time in my life. So would I. It didn't take long for word to spread. I hadn't told my parents directly, but family has a way of carrying news faster than any headline. Within a week, Damien's name lit up my phone. Against my better judgment, I answered, "So it's true," he said without greeting. His tone was dripping with amusement. "You're getting married." "Where's it happening?" "Celine, a backyard barbecue. Maybe the VFW hall down the street." I didn't rise to his bait, but my silence was answer enough. He chuckled and hung up, leaving the insult to linger in the room like smoke. A few days later, I overheard my parents' voices when Grandma accidentally left her phone on speaker during our call. My father was muttering in the background, She probably can't afford anything real. Maybe a courthouse with plastic flowers. Evelyn added something softer, but no less cutting. It's embarrassing. Really? Damien's wedding was an event. Hers will be small? I ended the call politely, but the words lodged deep inside me. For the first time since Julian proposed, doubt crept in. Would my wedding measure up? Would people see it as lesser? As proof of everything my parents believed about me that night? Julian found me sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling aimlessly through photos of elaborate receptions. He placed his hands on my shoulders and leaned close. You're thinking about them again, aren't you? I tried to deny it, but the tears in my eyes betrayed me. What if they're right? What if our day looks like a pale shadow of his? Julian tilted my chin until I met his gaze. They'll never understand what we're building. Our wedding isn't about spectacle. It's about us, the people who actually matter. That's worth more than any ballroom or chandelier. His words steadied me. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I was choosing something they couldn't measure or mock. And I knew, sooner or later, they would see just how wrong they'd been. The estate glowed like something out of a storybook. Lanterns hung from the trees, fairy lights traced along the stone archways, and the gardens stretched in a soft shimmer beneath the evening sky. As I walked down the aisle, my grandmother's face was wet with tears, her smile trembling but radiant. My aunt clasped her hands together as if she had been waiting her whole life to see me like this. Julian's eyes never left mine. For the first time in years, I felt completely seen, not as someone's daughter or sister, but as myself, worthy, loved, and chosen. When we spoke our vows, I barely noticed the guests behind us, though I could hear my cousins quietly crying. It was the kind of intimacy I had dreamed of, but never thought I'd deserve. Dinner was served in the garden under strings of light. My aunt stood and gave a speech, her voice breaking as she spoke about resilience, about how love wasn't measured by grand gestures but by quiet faith. My cousins surrounded me, adjusting my dress, snapping photos, making me laugh until my cheeks ached. I thought I might feel the ache of absence, but instead there was only peace. Their chairs were never meant to be here. Their absence wasn't a wound. It was a gift. Later, I saw the glow of phones as my cousins posted a few pictures online. I didn't mind. I wasn't hiding anymore. By the time we stole away for our first dance, I knew those photos would travel far, farther than I ever cared to send them. And I knew that eventually. Richard, Evelyn, and Damien would see them the wedding they said I would never have, the life they claimed I couldn't build unfolding without them. The morning after our wedding, my phone lit up like a fire alarm. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts, all from my parents and Damien. Each message was angrier than the last. Evelyn accused me of betrayal, writing long paragraphs about how a daughter should never shame her family. Richard's tone was harsher. He claimed I had humiliated them by marrying into power without including them, that people at the country club were already talking. Then came the public posts. Evelyn flooded Facebook with stories painting herself as the wounded mother, abandoned by her ungrateful daughter. She even wrote that Richard's heart was broken because he hadn't walked me down the aisle. Strangers and acquaintances commented with sympathy, never knowing the truth. I might have ignored it, but Julian's father didn't. He called me into his office one evening, his face stern. "This ends now," he said. That night, he phoned my parents himself. I never heard the full conversation, but I know he told them if they didn't stop, he'd make sure everyone knew they had excluded me from Damien's wedding. Within hours, the posts vanished, the calls stopped. Silence. At last. It lasted only a few months. Then HR slid a resume across my desk with Damien's name at the top. He'd listed me as a reference. as if our history didn't exist. I refused. 2 days later, he showed up at my apartment, his voice raised. "You're my sister." "You're supposed to help me." I stared at him, calm. Family is supposed to help family. Where was that when you locked me out of yours? His face reddened, but I didn't move. This time, he was the one who left with nothing. Months passed in quiet rhythm, and for the first time in years, my life felt steady. When I learned I was pregnant, joy replaced the old ache I carried. I told no one at first, except Grandma. She cried on the phone, her voice trembling with excitement. "You'll be a wonderful mother, Celine," she said, and I believed her. A few weeks later, a package arrived at my door. Inside were tiny knitted baby booties and a photo of Evelyn sitting in her armchair with yarn in her lap. There was no note, just the unspoken message an olive branch disguised as sentiment. Not long after, I saw her post online. She had written about how thrilled she was to become a grandmother to both of her children's babies, as if history had been rewritten. Comments poured in, congratulating her, praising the family's joy to the world. She played the part of the proud, loving mother. I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. Maybe she meant it as peace, or maybe it was just another performance, another way to claim me publicly while ignoring what had truly been broken. The truth pressed heavy. I didn't know if they could change, but I did know I wouldn't bend anymore. I wouldn't chase their approval or give them access to my child simply because of blood. If they wanted to be in this new life, they would have to prove they belonged. I closed the laptop, resting my hand against the small swell of my belly. I finally understood what my family had failed to teach me. Blood makes you related, but respect and love make you family, and I was done settling for less.